Welcome to the Salt Lake City Motion Graphic Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Noakes, and with me we have a special guest, Michael Jones of MoGraph Mentor, founder of MoGraph Mentor. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks
Salt Lake City. It's a great area.
It's awesome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Michael, I want to get to know you a little bit more. So if you can introduce yourself, tell us your background, how you got to where you are right now, how you started everything.
Okay. Well, my name is Michael Jones. I currently live in Bend, Oregon with my wife, Paige, and our 2 kids. I run an online school called MoGraph Mentor, which I started really started working on about 5 years ago, but it's been in operation for about 4 years. I also still freelance as kind of a motion designer, creative director, even producing some live action stuff from time to time. How I got here is a long story. I'll just keep it brief. Born in Texas. Dad was military. Mom was a kindergarten teacher. Moved kind of just all over the southeastern, midwestern United States. Grew up into sports, not in any way artistically inclined or knowing anything about design or animation other than going to movies and liking movies, but not knowing anything about it. During my undergraduate years, I had a brother-in-law attending Ringling College of Art and Design in Sarasota, Florida, where he was studying character animation to go work in feature films, and then he got a job at Blue Sky, which is owned by Fox, and they make the Ice Age films and the Rio films and a bunch of other movies that they've done. And seeing his example of getting to work in a studio and do animation and make films definitely just gave me a perspective that it was a real job, that you could study art and design and actually go get a job that paid you really well. So I just cite his example as the beginning of, well, now maybe I'll start looking into design and animation and film and what I might be interested in. So I actually did a little bit of online education. I took some online character animation courses where you kind of start with a ball bounce and then you do like walk cycles and then do some basic posing and stuff. But in doing character animation, I really more discovered that I preferred kind of the design side of things and animating more simplistic type stuff. And so really kind of pivoted from character animation towards more motion graphics and applied for an unpaid internship down in Cooper City, Florida, which I did for about 9 months. And that gave me an opportunity to do some really, really simple After Effects stuff, just get my feet wet, kind of understand how some of the workflow of producing live action and producing graphics and kind of how that world worked. And then after that internship, I got really, really serious about spending a lot of time in After Effects, doing as many projects as possible, reading design books, trying to understand the principles of design. It feels like such a mysterious black box when you're first starting out of like, how does anyone make anything that looks visually pleasing? It feels like an impossible thing. So I really struggled with the visual side of it for so long. But I was able to put together a first portfolio, a first reel, which is still online, and it's horribly embarrassing, and it's mostly just tutorials-driven stuff, just copying tutorials and stuff. But even that was enough to get me a first job at a very small studio that was a part of a ministry in Fayetteville, North Carolina, making $29,000 a year. So that was my first job to okay, you're going to make motion graphics, and we're going to pay you to do it. I did that for about a year and a half, and that's where I really learned kind of a next layer of really more of a production environment and having deadlines and kind of getting original things turned around, not just copying tutorials. And then I worked with some other ministries, some other churches that were kind of multi-campus churches where they had video screens and they would produce a lot of video content. And I really didn't even know that world existed until I saw some of those bigger churches that really spend a lot of money on creating original films and original media. But I then kind of wanted to go work in more of an ad agency setting and try to understand how that world works. So I had applied for some jobs kind of all over the country, just seeing if I could get a job anywhere. And now maybe I've been doing design and animation for 3 or 4 years. The portfolio is a little bit better, still pretty rough considering I didn't go to art school, so a lot to learn. But I got a job offer in Portland, Oregon to make $50,000 a year to do 3D and 2D design and animation for an ad agency. And that agency turned out to be a totally terrible place to work. The ownership team was a married couple that had just gone through a divorce, and things got very ugly. And I was probably there only 8 weeks. Like, it flamed out almost immediately. So we had moved to Portland. We had basically no money, made like $800 in the bank,
Gosh.
And so that job totally flames out. But then I started freelancing, and there were studios in Portland that gave me a chance to come in and start with some simple stuff and then kind of work my way up. So then I just spent, the better part of a year in Portland, kind of hopping around to different studios, getting to work with really talented people. And that was my first look at people producing a Nike ad and seeing the types of artists that were working on it, and just how much production value really went into some of that high-end stuff. And so that was just incredibly eye-opening about the level of artists that really are required to make great work. And so I'm super grateful that I got to be around a lot of those people and continue to learn and grow as a visual artist, and also doing technical stuff, doing VFX stuff. Then I got really burnt out of doing in-studio hours. And so I decided to really try to build just a kind of roster of clients to just freelance from home and kind of be able to work from home and choose my own schedule. And so then I guess for maybe 3 or 4 years, it was just mostly freelancing, just working from home, making videos for small businesses or for large corporations or for churches, basically whoever needed a video, whether it was live action or something motion driven, just doing a lot of that. And then, I've told the story many times before, but just briefly, my wife and I would always have conversations about how someone needed to start an online school that was similar to the ones that I had done for character animation, but more for motion design. And I always felt like, well, it's such an obvious idea. Clearly somebody qualified will do it. But enough years went by where we really decided, what if we could recruit a team of instructors and kind of put it together? What would that look like? And so I'd say after really thinking about it for several years, then we finally decided to give it a go and kind of save up some money to invest in a website and to recruit some instructors and kind of see what their vibe on it was, and if they were interested in working with students, and maybe how would that format look. And so, now here we are 4 years later, just doing MoGraph Mentor and still freelancing, and just having a good time.
Wow, super impressive. One question I have is, when you started MoGraph Mentor, I guess you were saying obviously like there was people better than you. How well connected were you with the motion community? Were you well connected, not known at all? What was your status at that point?
Yeah, I would say that I was probably not very well connected. I mean, I certainly knew a lot of people, and a lot of people knew of me from Twitter and Vimeo, but probably not very well known because I didn't go to a really good art school. And then, I feel like there's a little bit more of a kind of direct line from the really great schools to the really great studios, because that's a great place for those studios to go and recruit students. So in that world, completely unknown, but just over time, reaching out to those people who did go to those great schools and saying, how about you come work with MoGraph Mentor students? And I've been incredibly grateful of just how willing people are to give of their time and to work with people. And so I feel like we've created a really interesting alternative that I wish existed. When I was first figuring this stuff out, I would have definitely been a student of it. So, that was kind of the premise of putting it together.
Can you tell us any stories, successful stories about students that you've had that have gone on to have careers in motion graphics?
Sure. I hate to take credit, a lot of people come in with different skill sets. So the people who were the most successful after working with our instructors, the most immediately successful, were people who came in with a little bit more experience and maybe a good eye. And I'd say the big differentiator between who we see really end up succeeding and who doesn't seems to be the amount of time people are willing to put in. Like, everyone can be equally interested in how cool it is, but who's really willing to be prolific, I guess is the word, be able to do a lot of really great work really quickly, because I think a lot of studios are looking for that. But so all that just to say, I mean, we've had students come through and then, now work at Google, right? So it's like, well, that's a nice success story, doing good work.
Yeah.
Students who've done a little bit of work with us and maybe go on to a place like Giant Ant or other studios, Veracity Collab in Southern California. A lot of it is freelance work typically, because after somebody graduates, we literally kind of just have a one-on-one and say, well, what's your best case scenario? Do you want to be applying to all these studios, and we'll write letters of recommendation and we'll email them and try to connect you? Or do you just want to try to get clients and freelance?
You will email the company for your students?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, that's basically what we do. If you go through all three, then we try to take a look at your portfolio, think about, first of all, where you live in the world, because these people are all over the planet. So it's like somebody in Croatia, it's a different circumstance than someone who's in Irvine,
right,
California. So it's got to be, highly individualized of who they're going to target, and, just figuring out what's going to be the right fit for them. But 95% of graduates say, well, I want to freelance. People don't seem to want to go work at a place full time. They all
You said 95%?
I mean, almost everybody says it'd be better for me if I could just work from home and make my own schedule, right, and have clients. Right. And it's like, well, why not? Yeah, that actually would be for most people their preference, I think. So then it becomes a case of, now that's a harder route to go, to say, I don't want to go work somewhere, I just want people to come to me. Well, now you're kind of an independent consultant contractor. Your work needs to be really good. You need to be kind of viewed as an expert to some extent, that people will give you money because freelancers represent, I think, a higher risk for companies. But all that just to say, helping people build a portfolio and kind of build a strategy to go and get more clients, to try to figure out how to make a career from working from home, which can be tough, but obviously never been easier in the era that we're in here.
How do you go about contacting these companies? You mentioned Veracity Labs or Google. Are you contacting somebody in Google and saying, hey, I have a guy that you might like?
The guy who works at Google, no. We did not contact Google. We have some contacts at Google, but no, we didn't specifically advocate for him on that specific one. But mostly it's a lot of LinkedIn. I find LinkedIn to be a pretty incredible tool, because finding a contact at any given company, if you're willing to pay for the LinkedIn premium, is actually pretty easy. And then finding people with the right job title who would actually be in a position to receive that email, or at least be in the ballpark, so that you can get to the right person to kind of send that email. And it really just depends on how big the company is. I feel smaller companies are usually even easier, because small companies freely put their contact info out, because it's like, hey, contact me, here's my information. But again, it really comes down to the students creating a portfolio that makes those emails mean anything. Because it's like, we can send emails all day, but if the portfolio looks worse than everyone else's portfolio that they're seeing for that job, well, then that recommendation really doesn't mean that much. And that is a little bit of the beast of our industry. It's show and tell. I mean, even if someone came to me and said, I have a 4-year degree from the best art school, it's like, oh, that's great, let's look at your portfolio. Right. And then if the portfolio is terrible, you would say, well, I don't care at all that you have that degree. It means almost nothing. Or if somebody with a fantastic portfolio and no degree, I mean, it wouldn't matter at all. So I think that's why MoGraph Mentor in part can exist, because you really can just learn to make great work. And you would think, well, it'd be better for me if I have a prestigious degree. And I think going to a prestigious school can help get you more opportunities, but then still the bottom line is your portfolio. So if you can manage to make a really great looking portfolio, then it probably doesn't matter where you studied ultimately, if you can be proactive about going out and finding yourself opportunities for work.
So what are you teaching your students?
Well, we're teaching fundamentally design, animation, and filmmaking concepts. We want them to understand design principles, understand the workflow of something like look development, how an idea manifests itself into a visual, and then what does the process look like to do a look development, to create a great looking piece of artwork, and then focusing on animation principles. Then how do we bring that to life and think about all the different ways that we can use animation to tell a story. And then a step back from that is, then it's kind of a piece of film. There's like an editorial quality to it. There's music, there's a story arc. So motion design really seems to be people who have to weave together various disciplines of illustration, design, animation, film, sound, to kind of create this film. So actually the more we do this, the more I think of us fundamentally as kind of a film school, because everything we end up with is, kind of a short film in a sense. So yeah, kind of all of the above. We're just trying to, and it's all project based. So, you're going to make a short film, and then week by week, you're just touching on every part of that process of, getting into your storyboards for multiple weeks. How do you do good storyboard development? What does a good workflow look like? But then what does a strong composition look like? How do you effectively tell a strong statement, make a strong statement in a single image? So that's that kind of communication arts theory that they try to pound into you in art school of, using visuals and using symbols, not as decoration, but for meaning, to like whether you're selling something or telling a story, whatever the goal is. So we basically try to emulate what art schools do with motion design.
Can you take us through like one example of like what makes a good image or a good frame?
What makes a good frame? Well, design principles speak to what makes something compelling to our eye. So something like contrast is huge. Does a frame, and it's not just luminance, right? It's not just black and white contrast. It's also a contrast in size. Is there anything interesting with scale happening in the scene? Does the image have any kind of rhythm to it? Does it suggest any motion, or does it feel really static? What makes a good image is based on a lot of things. It's based on a lot of variables, I think. And I think that is those design principles. Yeah, that's a tough question to answer
I'm super
on a
impressed.
podcast.
So I'm wondering, did you make up the curriculum yourself, or did you have help from other people?
So the curriculum you would want for a motion media undergrad is pretty clear and universal across every art school. You're basically going to introduce people to art history and kind of visual communication history. First of all, like understand what you're doing. You're engaged in the communication arts. That's like your baseline. And then you take people through the various things that we talked about. Do you understand design principles, like as they are? And then you study animation. Okay, let's do a ball bounce. Let's talk about overlap, and let's talk about squash and stretch and all those things. And then you kind of mature into discussions about filmmaking and directing and creative direction and art direction. So the curriculum is probably pretty identical at every art school in the country, of kind of starting with those foundational disciplines, trying to engage projects so that you can hopefully try to understand as much as you can about each of these various disciplines, and then asking students to creatively problem solve and like make a short film. And that's what students will do in art schools, and just engage these principles and these ideas that are not a secret, and you don't have to go to art school to get them. You don't have to go to MoGraph Mentor to get them. You can read them in books. You can read them online. MoGraph Mentor's value, I don't think, is fundamentally us saying like, these are the design principles, and you had to give us money to get at these ideas, because the ideas are clear. More the value of what we're offering is, let's go through these things step by step while you work with someone who's working in the industry that you can get to know, that gets to know you, that can be there to answer your questions week to week and work with you on a one-on-one basis and do critique. So I very rarely would tell anyone like, you should come to MM because the curriculum is so unique and cutting edge. It's like, well, it's basically the same at every school if you're studying this stuff. So yeah, I guess that would be my
So a
answer
student
to
needs
that.
to be engaged with the mentors to get the most value out of it.
Oh, certainly. Yeah,
They can't just like hodgepodge, like, oh yeah, I'm logging in once a week. They need to be actively having conversations and.
Yeah, for the mentorship classes, certainly. I mean, we now are offering, and you took the classical animation class. Now we're
Right.
offering some other like on-demand technical stuff because that's part of it too. I mean, we always say we want you to know the artistic, the technical, and the professional part of working in the industry. The technical part's really important too. I mean, being really adept at character design and really adept at perspective drawing and really adept at classical animation makes you really valuable.
Yes.
It's like, if you have all that, I can use you right now.
Yes.
Like if you have those skills. So learning that technical stuff is super important. But MoGraph Mentor's mentorship classes are like, okay, then how do those things get deployed? It's like, what do you make? Why, what is it? How does that manifest into a great piece of work that's really compelling or entertaining? And isn't just like vanilla and just looks like kind of everything else that's out there, which is tough. It's hard to make good work. It's very difficult, as you know.
We have a lot of people in the Salt Lake motion graphic group that are just starting out, trying to get better. They're wondering, should I focus on 2D, 3D? Like, there's so much out there. What kind of advice would you give someone starting out? What's your philosophy about getting better and learning, even if you're at an age maybe of 25, 26, or 22 or whatever?
I mean, that seems like a great age to be learning this stuff. I mean, it certainly depends on what you want to do. If your goal is to be a really great technical artist and go work at Disney and like control the water simulations in Moana, which was like some gorgeous technical work in those films, and all like high-end commercials and high-end films have that stuff. If that's your goal, you should probably be just geeking out on like Houdini and technical stuff and like be amazing at that. If you were in my position where you wanted to be a freelancer and you wanted to be the art director and like make your own stuff, then I would say if you're just starting out, learn to draw and learn design principles. Like learn to draw because was it Saul Bass who said like, learning to draw just helps you get your ideas out really quickly. That's not what he said, I'm paraphrasing, but I feel like in our line of work, when somebody immediately comes and it's like, well, I need a video for X, X or Y, then it's like, when you can just immediately put pencil to paper or on the Cintiq and start to put together compositions quickly that are coherent and evocative and have the principles of design, it just, for me, then is becoming so much easier to produce work for people. And then I feel like when you can really articulate a composition and you really are putting the lines where you want them in a drawing, I feel like it just kind of has a bit of a cascading effect even when you go into Illustrator or when you're working in Photoshop. Just you're kind of refining your eye and deciding what you want in a shot. So learning to draw. And then I think the biggest thing, like for some of my students this semester, is when you're thinking about design, really considering the principle of emphasis. Like, what is the emphasis of this shot? A lot of times beginners, and I was probably the worst among them, will just cram things into the frame and just want to put lots of stuff and like, oh, maybe it'll look better if I add this or this or this, when there's no consideration for what is this shot supposed to convey? What is the emphasis of this shot? This is the communication arts. What are we communicating? Right. And what's like the core of the idea? And how do we use shapes and colors and light to make a really strong statement about that idea of what is in the shot? And I struggled with that for a very long time, and I feel like the only way to kind of get through that and become better is to kind of draw and illustrate. So I definitely encourage young motion designers to definitely get into that, but there's probably no wrong answer. I mean, if you can spend a lot of time getting to know After Effects and then maybe drawing a little bit later, I think you kind of, each of us just works on what we're interested in and then kind of see where that takes us, but yeah, that's my 2 cents.
That's good 2 cents. Do you believe that everybody has the capability to improve no matter what age they are, or do you think there's just people that are gifted and those are the people who have a monopoly on all the talent?
So I think some people are a really good fit for this type of work, and their personalities fit for it, and they just seem to be a natural. Like when you have 6 students in a class, and consistently one person is delivering stuff that has like a real visual polish, and you're like, wow, it just really stands. You're just seeing it. You're seeing it and you're understanding it. And for whatever reason, there does seem to be people that are way more inclined to doing it than other people, which actually kind of surprised me, because I used to have more of a blank slate theory of this kind of work of just like, well, you could just teach anyone to do it given enough time. Yeah. And maybe it's an extension of passion. It seems that you have to be really, really into it to be good at it, because it's so hard. It's so hard to be good at illustration. It's so hard to be good at animation. It's so hard to make compelling films and edits and music and weave it all together. It is very, very difficult to go even slightly above average with your work. I really believe that. And if someone is slightly on the fence about it, it just really shows. So I think it's probably a question of who loves it so much that their happy place is to be in front of the computer wrestling with keyframes and geeking out. People who do that, which was very much what I was like, because there's so much to learn. The learning curve on the software is pretty steep, actually. There's a lot of stuff to figure out, and it really takes years to kind of weave it all together. But I'd say passion and who really wants to spend the time in front of the computer or in front of the Cintiq probably end up making the stuff that we all then talk about as like, oh my gosh, look, this stuff is amazing.
Right. What about if somebody's struggling, focusing on 2D, 3D, or trying to, I don't even know if like people should decide, like if I decide between the two, but like what are your 2 cents on 2D, 3D, the type of work? Like can someone just specialize in 2D and be successful, or do they have to get into 3D? Like what's your philosophy, or what's your thoughts on that? Yeah,
there's certainly people succeeding being specialists, and then I think there's people succeeding who do a bit of everything and try to weave it all together. And I guess it depends on what you want to be focused on. I know some people are super technical and they would rather just be the technical director and like wrestle with the math and the software. And those people should probably put on blinders and not like convince themselves to learn every other thing. They should just be amazing at that thing and get paid to do that. So again, it's a little bit of a question of where you want to be in the industry. Like, what do you want to be doing? If you want to work on feature films, you've probably got to be an expert level in something hyper specific. You're like amazing at character animation, or you're amazing at character design, or you're amazing at matte painting, or you're amazing at technical direction. Because, when you're making a $90 million movie, you don't hire a lot of generalists. They get a small team of directors at the top, and everybody else in the pyramid has a hyper-specific job. Sure. Now, at a small video agency, it's like, well, then it'd be great to know 2D and 3D and like be able to do variety each time. So I guess it just has an economic implication of where you want to be, what you want to be doing for a living.
Yeah, and so I think I struggle with the distractions out there. For example, AR is coming out. I had an experience with AR and I was like, whoa, this is amazing. I think this is going to be everywhere. Yeah.
Interesting.
It was a cereal box, Golden Grams.
Really?
And I stuck my phone to it, and then I was playing games with it.
Through your phone. Interesting.
It was sweet. Yeah.
Interesting.
It was a cool AR experience.
That's cool.
So once I saw that, I thought, all you need is like the devices just need to be really friendly with AR, and then advertisers and marketers.
There's a whole new world of,
Whole new world, yeah. So, then I'm like, well, I'm focusing on what I'm focusing on right now. Getting into AR is a whole, it's a huge thing. It's very team oriented, and that's a big undertaking. So that's kind of where I struggle with. There's so many technologies and whatnot coming out. Yeah. What do you focus on? Do you have faith that will provide for you?
I mean, what's interesting about something like augmented reality is once they solve the software and the hardware, they still then need to come back to character designers and animators and visual artists and 3D modelers, and they still need us at this point. They don't have an AI that can like create it for them yet. Yeah. So that just says to me, that's like, what a huge expansion of the marketplace that's going to be for our skills if we're making stuff for TV and web and websites, but now they also need character animators to create, every possible AR thing. So
I think it's huge, but I don't think it's so huge on the After Effects side. I see it more huge on the 3D side of
3D
things.
stuff.
Yeah. I think the artists, like the concept artists, totally still there. I think the 3D artists and modelers, definitely in demand.
Yep.
The After Effects animators, 2D,
Yeah.
they might stick to explainers.
I know, but there'll also be apps, don't you think, that are just more like heads-up display type stuff of just kind of like 2D text-based type things.
Yeah, you're
there
right.
could be a little bit of that.
For sure.
I agree. I'd be more bullish on like being a character designer, character animator,
Right.
3D modeler. There's so many possible exciting technologies that are going to come out of this. It's
Yeah.
going to be incredibly cool.
Let's talk about your goals. Where do you want to go in the future? Is it in motion graphics? Is it more in entrepreneurship? What are Michael Jones's goals?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my goal over the next little bit is to really do some personal work, actually. Try to take a step forward in my own abilities as a visual artist and an animator and a filmmaker. Because I feel like the last 5 years have been pretty dedicated to doing MoGraph Mentor, and it's now in this really incredible place that I never thought we would get to. And, you know, I realize how badly I want to be doing work again.
So you're talking about motion work.
I'm talking about motion work, I'm talking about film. I have a bit of a love for film and documentary stuff. I've done a bit of live action, and I'm really interested in that. There's also, it looks like we're going to be starting kind of a MoGraph Mentor equivalent for like a film school, just a traditional film school, like live action film. And I won't say anything more than that to protect the identity of our partners on that one, but we'll be able to put that out at some point here in the future. So I'm excited about that too. I mean, I love online education. I'm incredibly interested in how quickly it's all changing and some of the really big problems in higher education that are very, very real. And it just definitely feels like a once in a lifetime kind of paradigm shift of everybody's really down on the traditional education for undergraduate because costs have gotten so high, especially in the arts too. So I think art schools, specifically private art schools, are among the most expensive in the country. So it actually is slightly worse, particular to our industry in terms of undergraduate. So I feel like it's a unique opportunity for people to really find new ways to get the skills that they need. And so yeah, just excited to be a part of it.
We were at, this is probably the last thing and then we'll wrap up, but I felt like this was really important message. You had a conversation with Rob Garrett, I think, and you guys were talking about students in art school and almost how the top, and this might have been an opinion, I don't know if you're still with this opinion, but almost the top student was okay. But then like everybody else was in a bad circumstance because they were so much in debt and they couldn't make up for it.
Yeah. So I will give a lot of credit to these big private art schools. They put out annual reports, and you can like read about their graduation rates and read about their net costs. They're probably required by law to publish that information, but they put it out there. And I think Rob and I were kind of like digging into some of this information. And it does seem that about the top 15% of kids at the big four-year private schools, although they're paying a lot, probably will make a lot of money. They'll make close to 200 grand, 150, 200 grand annually to either be art directors or go work at the big film studios or do something really, really impactful because they're incredibly talented. An interesting thing that we found was, and I hope I don't get it incorrect, the top 25% of kids at a 2-year program, so 60 credit hour school, outperformed the bottom 50% of kids at a 4-year school. So if you're really driven, even just going to a 2-year school probably makes a lot of sense if you're going to be in design and animation. Yeah, I mean, it's tough because there are a lot of schools and a lot of community colleges now have kind of like motion media programs and stuff, and I'll give them a lot of credit. So I think there are a lot of options. It is really just specifically talking about probably the top 30 or 40 4-year art schools, private schools, that are prices close to $40,000 a year. If you're not in the elite of your group there, you probably overpaid by a considerable amount relative to what you're really going to make.
I thought that was good advice. Just alternate.
But it's a hard
ways.
question to know if you're in that top 15.
Yeah, and it's sensitive. I feel like because you can't just dog on these schools. I think, but I think there's alternate opportunities, MoGraph Mentor and other online educational places that people can go to.
If you're a self-starter, sure.
Right.
If you really love it and you're going to do it no matter what, it's like, yes, you can do it for almost no money at this point.
Right.
It's tough too because I definitely don't ever want to oversell that online education is really solving the problem for us, because it really isn't. So few people are doing online education relative to how many kids still actually go fully enroll in the art schools.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, we can say how it's getting so bad and the prices are so high, but enrollment hasn't really tailed off. Like, a lot of them have more applicants than ever and waiting lists. So it's like the big institutions are still really important that we get it right, in a sense.
That's surprising. I didn't know that. I thought they'd be failing or falling behind, and online's going up.
No, I mean, they're charging a lot, but people are paying it. It's like the position that they're in, and just across the board, it's like, well, it's very expensive to go to Stanford, but nobody thinks Stanford's in trouble. It's
Right.
like Stanford's not going anywhere. Ringling's not going anywhere. Art Center's not going anywhere. It's like these schools are still incredibly prestigious. They still have world-class recruiters coming through there. So if you can be an amazing student and really take advantage of those institutions, then it's still a really, really, really great path right to the top of the industry, or at least very close to it, and getting those types of
But that's if you're the
contacts.
top, and we're talking about what?
But it's hyper competitive.
5% of the
It's hyper
students?
competitive. I mean, maybe the top 15% of kids
Okay.
will get really, really good jobs.
So everyone else is just in debt, and they're going to work somewhere else.
Well, they'll work, but they may just not make as much money to have justified how much they paid for the degree, necessarily. Not to say they won't make any money.
Right. I'm a proponent of online, just how much cheaper it is. Just seems like there's a greater ROI, less risk.
Certainly less risk, yeah. But
And
I just feel like
it seems like if you have a mentorship opportunity where your mentors are actually like engaging with your students, the student can involve himself enough that he can get a lot out of it.
Oh, certainly. No, I think we're a great option. I just think we probably can't also move into a situation where we don't think that these bigger institutions should change or reform or become cheaper or protect students more. So one thing that kind of comes out when you look at all their graduation rates and everything and retention rates is about 30% of students never make it past freshman year. So about 30% will go in and do 1 year and take out debt and then leave. And they don't have any kind of piece of paper to show for that time that helps them in any way. So they just have all debt with almost no upside. And 30%, I guess, to me seems really high, and at some institutions it's even higher than that. Some places go as high as 50% of people don't make it past the first year. And I just wonder if there should be more of a responsibility on those institutions to either vet people better so you don't let people in that are going to flame out, like find some ways to create some summer workshops or something, or some like cheaper classes that you do first, or maybe some cheaper online stuff where you can like really prove that you're serious. Mm-hmm. I bet even if you made half of those 30% just take a couple online classes and they wouldn't even do it, well, then that would tell you, well, you don't even belong on campus coming here. So I'd like to see more stringent requirements to protect students that are going to be in that 30%. Now, what is the incentive for them to turn away those kids' money? They really don't have any incentive to do that. That probably sounds like bad business from their perspective. But if you think of a university more as kind of an institution for the public good in a sense and not a business, then I think it's reasonable to say, if you have all these high dropout rates after 1 year, couldn't you do anything to maybe bring that number down slightly to maybe vet people a little bit better?
So do you think most of the dropouts are dropping out then? They
I think it's
wasted
too
their
hard.
money, or do you think they're actually like, oh, I learned what I learned, I'm going to go now?
Oh, it's probably a mix, yeah. And it's probably different scenarios in different instances. I think some are just not prepared academically to be on a college campus. High school didn't prepare them. Some people who just switch, they kind of get into it and they say, well, this isn't really what I want to do. Now I want to do something else. But even in that person's situation, That's why I'd like to see a little bit of a softer gradient of cost for that person.
Sure.
To say, like, could there be a summer workshop? Could we do like a 6 or 8 week thing? Like, could we figure out if you like it on a $4,000 thing versus a $40,000 thing? Like, it just seems like such a huge risk.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's probably a mix in that 30% of why people are flaming out after 1 year. But it's a hard question. I'm sure it's quite complicated to figure out.
Well, Michael, thank you for your time. It's been a good conversation. You have a lot of good insight, and I'm just so impressed of how you articulate just the steps of learning from design and animation and the whole career, and you make it into a package for students to really understand. And I think you're doing a great work. I really mean that.
Well, thanks, man. Appreciate you having me on.